everybody, in this video, I'm going to interview 3 developers to show you the different ways you can approach an interview. We're going to not only solve the interview question, we're also going to show different ways to shine in your interview. I have 3 incredible guests who agreed to be on this mock interview. We've got Piyush Agarwal, Roadside Coders. You may have seen his interview series. We have Jack Herrington, who specializes in deeply technical tutorials. And we have Dodds, the master of React. Through this interview series, I want you to understand not only how you would look at the requirements and understand them, but also what your thought process should be. So here's what we're going to build today. We're going to build a form validation flow, and our form will have 4 fields: first name, last name, email, and password. And we're giving very basic validations. First name is required, same with last name, but they should have a minimum of 3 characters. Email is required and must be a valid format. Password is required, but minimum of 6 characters. Now, the requirements are vague because we want to see how our interviewees perceive them. There are some additional requirements, which is validation should happen as the user types, which is as you're typing, we want to see if it's valid or invalid. Submit button should only be enabled when all fields are valid, which is disable the form if there is something invalid. Provide visual feedback, red border for green for error and green check mark for valid. And the candidates are free to use vanilla JavaScript or React. So this is a typical interview question. And actually this question was asked to me in an interview. If you want more interview questions, check out this 31-day series that I have put together where I give you 1 interview question a day that has been commonly asked in interviews. So if you want a full React guide, find it in the comments below. But now, let's get into our interviews. First of all, we're going to see how Piyush approaches this interview.
When it comes to adding the validation inside of the form, when you're given such a task in your interviews, typically you can start by asking a few questions like, should the validation be aggressive, that is real-time, or gentle, that is on blur when you leave a particular field, right? Or probably if there's any internationalization needed for the error messages. When it comes to APIs, we can ask them, should we handle server-side validation errors? Do we get field-specific errors or not? And some key assumptions that I would take while building this.
So you see how he did not just start writing code immediately. First thing he verified, even though we have mentioned in the requirements that validation should happen as the user types, he was just drilling deep into that requirement and understanding we should actually debounce that, which is wait for the user to finish writing a few words, or we should do it on every keystroke, which is gentle versus aggressive, which is a great way to showcase that you not only care about the requirements that is given, but you also think beyond that about the user experience.
Like, for example, if I'm typing it and if I could get some real-time validation, like if this is the correct value or the incorrect value, so I can show red or green indicators using these colors and these icons as well.
And then he verifies his assumption, which is as the user is typing and the validation looks correct, you're going to show green icon of check mark. And if validation is failed, then we want to show red icons. So even before jumping into code, he's making sure that his requirements are clear and his assumptions are communicated.
So let's see the code. Over here, I've taken this form data use state and I've taken errors and is submitting state while the form is being submitted. And here's the function called validate field, which has a very simple validation rules, like for first name, last name, email, password, etc. Right. And if we further scroll down, let's go to the UI. Over here, you can see I've created a custom form field component. So if I go inside of it right here, it takes things like label, name, type, placeholder, form data errors, on input change, etc., like a very generic form field component.
Something that I want you to take away from this is that he actually created a new component called form field to add every field into this form. This is a good abstraction to show in your question. And this shows that you think about clean code as you write the component.
And inside this, I'm rendering these as follows, like label for better accessibility. The input tag with all of these has error, has valid, all of these are being handled right over here, right? And it will give the user instant feedback accordingly. And I'm also showing this icon right here according to the validation that is being requested, right? So let's see. When I type something inside of this, I trigger this on input change, which is coming from right here. And this has this handle input change, which takes the name and the value. So name is basically the name of the form, right? Form field. And the value is the value inside of that field. So then we are calling this validate field function right here, which enforces the validation rules. So you can see with respect to the name, I'm having a switch case right here. So for the first case, let's say if it's first name, I'm going to check the value. If value does not exist, then first name is required. If value or length is less than 3, then it must be at least 3 characters, right? So there are different stages of this validation right here. If not, we're gonna return null. That is, there's no error right here. So notice, as I have less than 3 characters right here, I can show the error over here. First name must be at least 3 characters. And same will happen with the other fields as well. If there are less than 3 characters over here, we can enter our email address and you can see if it is correct, then it will show check. Otherwise, I'm checking the email address using this email regex expression. For the password, I've given a very simple validation, like it should be less than 6 characters. So again, similar to what we have done above. Now, apart from these validations, you can ask some other questions like, do we need to add the accessibilities inside of this form, right? So you can add.
So notice how he handled the validation cases step by step, which makes for a very clean code again. But he did not just stop there. He also went above and beyond to ask about accessibility. This shows your seniority level and your technical skills to the interviewee. You did not just stop at the requirements that were given to you. You went above and beyond to think about accessibility and user experience.
Inside of the input accordingly using ARIA tags and stuff, right? If they want to use any libraries, like personally, I like to use React hook form with Zod a lot, or probably, you can also use Formake library for adding form validations quickly, right?
So one more way in which he shows that he's thinking about not just the current code, but also the larger code base in general and the maintainability of this form is by recommending libraries that can handle production level forms.
These libraries can be, better in case of if there's a lot of form fields, right? Like React hook form works if you have, let's say, 40, 50, or even more form fields. So it will work great in this scenario. And also notice, before submitting the form, we have this is form valid function. So inside of this handle submit function right here, we are triggering it, which is checking all of the required fields to see if all the fields have the values and there are no errors inside of our form. And with respect to that, we are triggering our loading and we are simulating an API call right here. So let's just go on and check it out. So I'll just fill out this form real quick. I'll just enter some random password, click on submit, and you can see the submission is going on and form submitted successfully. And the final thing is to test your form, which he has done beautifully. One thing to note is that not only did he test his form as he was coding, he also remembered to test it towards the end. So you're also testing for edge cases as you're typing, but you want to test for the happy path and the not so happy path as well. One thing that I love to do is that when requirements are given to me, I write down a list of cases or edge cases that I will be covering. And towards the end of the interview, I go through those edge cases to make sure that I passed all the requirements. Now let's interview Jack and see how he would approach this problem.
Okay, hi, I'm Jack Herrington, and I'm going to do a fake interview with Shruti Kaur. I am going to make a form validation flow, and she's asked me to have a 4-field form, first name, last name, email, and password, and there are some requirements on there. First name and last name, minimum 3 characters, password is minimum 6 characters. That's an awful validation for password, really. And email must be in a valid format. What that is, who knows? And then validation should happen as the user types. I don't like that requirement, but we'll get there. So let's start it. Let's go. Let's do this thing.
A junior interviewee would look at the requirements and just go as is. But the difference between a junior interviewer and a senior interviewer is that not only is the senior interviewer going to follow the requirements, they're also going to challenge the requirements and give their opinion. This is what sets a junior interviewer and senior interviewer apart. Also, note that he did not just sit there and fuss about the requirements. He's going to start implementing it and then later talk about his thought process, which shows that senior engineers can not only think about the requirements and challenge them, but they also have the maturity to prioritize implementation over talking about their opinions over and over again.
All right, I'm going to go over my Ghosty. I'm in my Shruti interview directory, and I'm going to use Handstack Start for this, primarily because I created this Handstack Start application builder, and I really like it. So let's go.
Now, this is a great way for somebody who works in open source to actually show their open source project while working in an interview. We have very limited time with the interviewers to show off our skills. And if it is an area adjacent to the interview question, this is a great way to kind of show off what you've done. Here's a caveat though. Before you pick another library, especially if you're working with a vanilla JS or a React interview, make sure you verify with the interviewer that that is okay to do so. But if the requirement doesn't forbid any third-party library, this is a great place to show off contributions that you have done to either open source or projects that you've built yourself.
And I also like TANSEC Start. Really like TANSEC Start. I like all the TANSECs. TANSEC Start is really awesome. And what it's going to allow me to do is it's going to allow me to do like API routes and server functions. And really, when you have a form like this, the data's got to go somewhere, right? So that's how you're going to get it there. You're either going to use something like Firebase and Convex or something like that, where you're working off the client, or you're going to need to post it back to your server. And the way you do that is with an API route or with the syntactic sugar over an API route, which is a server function. Okay, let's call this example interview. And the only extra thing I'm going to add is Tailwind, nothing else, none of the good stuff. And let's go. So I got Tailwind for the formatting. There you go. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to experiment with Valleybot. I got some feedback that like, hey, I like Zod. So I put on Twitter that like, hey, my PMPM init should just be alias to like PMPM init and then add Zod because I use it so often. And somebody was like, hey, well, why not Valleybot? So I'm like, I don't even know what Valleybot is. Turns out Valleybot is pretty popular. And it's popular primarily, I would say, I don't want to piss anybody off, but and it was smaller than Zod, just in bundle size. Although Zod has come out with Zod Mini, so that distinction may not be there, but whatever. Okay, so we've gone in that directory, and now I'm going to add Valleybot. That's the only extra thing I'm going to add there. And we're going to use Valleybot. So what is Valleybot? What are Valleybot and what are Zod? Well, Valleybot is a way to do runtime schema validation on JavaScript stuff. Arrays, objects, arrays of objects, all that kind of stuff. So in this case, we're going to have an object, and that object is going to have first name, last name, email, and password, and they are going to be validated using Valleybot. Okay, so let's go and bring this up in my editor, which I'm going to use cursor for this. Okay, so let's go take a look at what we have now. I'll just do pm dev in here. There we go. I guess I was a little bit fast on the terminal there. All right, let's bring that up, and voila. So this is my baby right here. This is create TANStack app, and it does a lot more than what I showed you. But one thing you can do is make real good apps. So we're going to go and replace this homepage with our form. Okay, so let's go and do some stuff there. Let's go over to our routes, and in there we got index PSX. And I'm just going to go and replace all of that. Let's get rid of all that. And I'm not going to bring in the header either. So I'm going to go over my root. My root, which applies to all the routes, has header in it. So let's get rid of header because we really don't need that. We just need like a blank page, right? Just a blank page to start from. And then we'll start building out our page. So let's go take a look at our page. Take a look, and we're a blank white page. That's great. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is create a schema for our object. So let's go and build that. So to do that, I'm going to bring in Valleybot, and then I'm going to create our form schema. And I'm going to use v.object, and v.object comes from Valleybot, and it says that the base thing here is going to be an object. You could use v.array if you have an array. And then you define the keys that you want inside of that object. So to define first name, I'm going to say that we've got a string, and then we're going to apply min length to that. That minimum length is going to be 3, as we saw in that spec. And then the error message we get to apply to that is that first name must be at least 3 characters. So let's now do last name, which is exactly the same thing, except name, last name. Email brings in a new validation called email. And so it handles all of the email validation for you. You can create your own custom validator if you want, but it's nice that there's this built-in email validator. And then password, the only variation here is that we're going to be a min length of 6 as opposed to 3 as we had with the first name and last name. Okay, so now down here in the app, we're going to need some state. So I'm going to bring in useState from React. And then we're going to define that we have we'll call it form data. We got set form data, and it's got the fields that we want in there, but we want to make sure that those things match. So can we get the TypeScript type from this form schema? Well, yes, we can. To do that, we use a little bit of TypeScript magic.
That is a great way of showing the interviewer, if you're using TypeScript, about why TypeScript is useful. Oftentimes what happens in an interview is that interviewees typically default to TypeScript without realizing why it might be useful. And this is a great way to showcase that you understand how and when types can be helpful.
We say that form data is the inferred output of the type of form schema. And then we can just use that as our type, form data. And now if we were to, for example, go and just remove first name, then problemo, because first name is required, therefore it needs to be in there, and voila. Now, no, right, we're not doing the runtime validation. We're not doing like the 3-character validation at this point. We're simply doing the types validation, and a type validation at this point is just saying it needs to be a type of string. Okay, so with the basics of the data handled, let's go and start building out our form. So I'll go create some divs at the top here. I'll basically set up the screen and put an H1 in there for registration form. And yeah, that looks pretty decent. I like that. Let's remove the sidebar over there. Okay, looks good. So now we're gonna have those 4 inputs as well as a submit button. And those 4 inputs are basically all gonna be the same thing. They're all gonna be input fields. Password is gonna be a type of password, but otherwise they're all gonna be the same thing. So they need a label, they need an input field, and they need an error area. So I think because we have a component-oriented framework and React, we should go and build a form field component. So let's go and start with that. All right, so I'm going to set up form field as a component. It's going to have label, name, value, on, change, error, and type. And so label is a label, name is the name of the field. So in a form, you have name field. The value is the current value. So it's going to be it's not going to maintain its own state, this component. It's going to have a value and an on change. And then it's going to have that error text and the type. So the type is going to be password. If it's a password field, otherwise we really want text. So that's where we're going to default that to text. And let's build this out, and I'll just kind of walk you through it. So I have a div that wraps the whole construction, a label component. That's awesome. And that label is connected to that input component, which has the value and the on change as well as the type. All this, of course, is formatted in Tailwind. And then if we have an error and if we have some text in the field, then we'll put up an error, because we really only want the error to appear if it is dirty. And so we'll just kind of use the current that length of the field as whether or not it's actually been touched. So, okay, I think this is a pretty good start. So let's go create our form. And then within that, we create our first field, which is the first name field. Looks pretty good, except we need a handle change here to actually go and set the value in that structure. Go back here and create our handle change function that takes the field name, which is going to be a key from that form data, which is going to be either first name, last name, password, email, and then the current value. And inside this function, we're going to call set form data, but we're going to use the function variant where we get the current value, which is in this case, the previous value, which is an object. So then we destructure that object as we create a new object. So we copy all of the old key value pairs in the old object, and then we override the field name with the new value that we just got from the user. All right, now there's one more thing in here, and that's errors.firstname. So we need an errors object, and that errors object needs to be the output of Valibot as it's actually checking that object. So let's go and bring in use memo, because we're going to use a use memo for this. And then down here after handle change, we're going to use that use memo, and then we're going to use safe parse from Valibot. We're going to give it that schema that we created as well as the current form data. We're going to depend on form data. So whenever form data changes, then we're going to run this use memo again. When you call safe parse, you get a list of issues. That's actually an array. So we're going to take that array of issues and we're going to turn that into an object where the key from the object says, hey, if you got any issues on this particular first name, last name, whatever, then just make that the value. So we're going to have like first name, might be not have enough characters, and therefore, we're going to get that as our error.
Before we proceed, I want you to understand why we used use memo here. Go back and take a look at the function and understand if you see the purpose of using use memo here. Put it down in the comments if you understand why we used use memo.
So let's see, are we good here? Yeah, looks pretty good. Okay. So let's hit save. Let's hit go, and there you go.
One thing that you'll notice that Jack did different from Piyush is that he tested one field at a time. And I think this is a great way to actually build up from a small field going up to multiple fields. It's a great way to test that the code that you've written so far works before adding other fields.
Now I'm going to show you why I don't really like this whole on change thing. So if I type J, right, immediately this red error text pops up and says, first name must be at least 3 characters long. And it's like, whoa, I'm just typing my name. I'm not done yet, right? And so there's a couple of different ways that you can do field validation. And the one I prefer is on blur, because on blur basically is when the user tabs off the field, then you get an on blur method, which is basically saying, hey, I'm done with this field, supposedly. And that's the point when I like to actually go and check stuff. I think this is way too aggressive, but this is what the spec calls for. Somebody give you the spec. Your interview, you get it the way you want.
Great way to challenge the requirements. Not only is he not afraid to challenge the requirements, but he also shows an example of why this could be a problem. This is perfect because that's what the interviewers are looking to see. Sometimes the requirements may be purposefully vague to see if you can spot the issues.
Okay, but otherwise it looks good. I mean, my kvetching aside, that looks good to me. So let's go and add the additional form fields. These are really just rinse repeat. So last name, email, and password. And of course, the type on password is password as opposed to text. And the type on email is the type of email. So let's take a look. And there you go. Looks really good. Okay. We can type in there. Yeah, looks good. And let's see, email address. Oh, that is a valid email address, apparently. And let's see, password 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There you go. Okay. Great password. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah. Okay. So now we need a submit button. And as I recall from the requirements, that submit button has to be disabled if there are any issues. So let's go and build our submit button. And so disable based on whether there are any errors in that object that has all of the errors in it. So we're going to take the values from the errors object. That's just going to be an array of the values. And they're going to either have strings or undefined. And all we're looking for is there anything in there that has a string? Because a string says that there's an error on that field. And if there's nothing that has that, then disabled is going to be false. So let's see. Take a look back at our form. And if I were to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so that one's good. And this one's good. And now submit is good. Okay, so the last thing we need is some way to handle the submit over here. So let's go back over to our cursor and we'll go and add an on submit to our form. And then to handle that, we'll create a function called handle submit. It will prevent the posting of the form because that's not how we handle form submits in React usually, unless you're in Remix or in TaskStar or next, whatever. Okay. Anyway, we're just gonna go and console log out whether the form is invalid or valid, and we're gonna use that same safe parse as we did before. Okay, let's take a look. So we'll bring up our console and let's submit. And there we go. The form is indeed valid. And so here's all that data. And then we would use like a server function or an API post to then post off to the backend endpoint and we save our data. So a couple of thoughts about this. So when it comes to these kind of coding exercises, it's always good to have some conversation around it, how you implemented it, what you think some options are for alternatives. I would say the way I would approach that is, one, I would have that thing about the on change versus on blur. I think that's important because it's a user DX thing, and I think it's good for engineers to have opinions about what good DX is. I mean, we all use the internet, right? We all have opinions about what's good and what's bad. And so, I mean, I think in my personal case, on change is inferior to on blur. The other thing that I would find a qualm with was it wasn't actually in the spec per se, but this is actually the second version of this video. The first version of the video, I used Tanstack's form library. which I guess is kind of a cheat since it does almost all of this. I mean, the validation is up to you, but the handling of whether a field is dirty or not and all that is actually, handled by that forms library. I think in reality, I would always want to use a forms library, whether that is the awesome TANSEC form library or something like Formic. You get to choose on that one. There are a lot of great ones, but I think you really should kind of steer folks towards using a forms validation library because there just are such good options out there. And really, you shouldn't have to deal with the sort of basic mechanics of a form. For example, again, I'm using this value length as a proxy for dirty. In reality, dirty, when it comes to a field, means that you've had some interaction with a field. You've changed the value somewhere. So how that should really be implemented in this case is that there should be like a is dirty object that matches form data where all the values are false to start. And when you interact with them, then you would change that to true. And from then on, it would stay true. And it would only show the error if the field has been altered in any way. So there's definitely some improvements to be made here. I think this is good enough, I would say, to go ahead and send in for an interview. I would certainly stand behind this code. But again, with those caveats, and when they ask me questions about it in the interview, then I can certainly have something to say and get my opinions on.
Okay, couple of takeaways from this interview. Not only was Jack not afraid to look beyond the requirements and challenge the requirements, he also showed some open source library that he worked on. He's worked on open source. He has experience working with validation libraries such as Valibot and Zod, and that he's not afraid to share his opinions, and that he can produce a working code. Overall, great way to showcase your skills. You know what? In today's time, not only is coding changing with the advent of AI tools, also is the way we take interviews. In the next section, we'll explore Kent's interview where he actually embraces AI in this interview and shows how he can use AI tool, which is Cursor, to still showcase his skills. This is not uncommon today when companies allow you to use AI tools. So his interview is a prime example where you can still show that you are skilled even though AI is writing most of the code. Let's take a look.
All right, so the problem, we need to build a form validation flow with the first name, last name, email, password, various requirements of validation and visual feedback of that. And look at this, I can use React. So of course I'm going to use React because I'm assuming that we want to build this as a long-standing maintainable project that we're going to be building out with the whole team, and it's going to be a big product. This is going to be amazing. And on top of that, I'm most familiar with React. And so I'm going to be most efficient and effective. And that'll be the best way for me to show off what I know. And that's what we do in interviews. So I'm going to go to React Router. We'll go to the docs and installation.
Before we even move forward, remember what he said. I'm most comfortable with React, and that's the most efficient way for me to showcase my skills. Remember that in an interview. There have been instances in my experience of interviewing candidates where I noticed that they were using skills that they were not very comfortable with just to show that they could use a skill. It's better to be proficient in a language that's not so cool instead of being not so proficient at a language that is cool. And that goes for React or vanilla JavaScript as well. If you feel you're more comfortable with JavaScript, use JavaScript. But if you feel like you can show off your skills in React, use React.
I'll just copy their installation instructions and we'll paste that here. We'll call this our interview form. And with this, let's make it a Git repository install with npm. This is a fantastic foundation for our project. So I'm going to open up the interview form in my preferred editor of Cursor. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to tell Cursor what to do here. This is a React Router version 7 application. Please create a registration page or route.
By the way, this is really cool how he's able to just speak text into Cursor. I have not tried this myself, but after watching this, I'm really intrigued to try it out myself.
And there we go. Let's have it check out the routes. Sweet. So it should be creating the route for us, the register route. And part of our job as engineers now is to be able to review the generated code and make sure that we really understand what's going on. under the hood.
Once again, emphasizing the same point that even though you're using AI to generate code, do not forget that you need to understand that code. So one of the key things that an interviewer is going to be looking at if they're allowing to use AI code tools is how you use the prompts and what kind of code review you do with the generated code.
So that's why I'm not really worried about using AI in an interview setting. In fact, if I were interviewing an engineer and they didn't use AI, I would be concerned about that because we are AI developers now. So let's come through here. We'll just accept these and then we'll go ahead and review it. Oh, it looks like it wants to run the type gen script, which does not exist. There we go. Type check. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, super. And now we're going to add a link to the homepage. That's going above and beyond. Here we've got a React Router client. That's not really a thing. So see, this is part of my job is to know how to do different things like that. Okay.
You see that? That's exactly what an interviewer is going to be looking at. Are you able to identify missing libraries? Are you able to identify places where AI has written sloppy code or has completely hallucinated and written wrong code? That's what an interviewer is looking for when they allow you to use AI tools.
There we go. So, run the dev script. Boom. Look at that. Awesome. And it says we're done. All right, let's take a look. Dun, da, da, da. We've got create an account. Oh my goodness. Would you look at that? Now, just because it looks nice doesn't mean it actually satisfies the requirements because clearly that is not an email address. But we did get a number of the requirements.
So what I like about his approach here is that for even looking at the code, he's actually testing what the UI looks like. And I think that is a great way to kind of give you indications of where to start looking into the code.
So we do have a first name, last name, email, and password. So, well, just a full name here. So let's go ahead and review the code that it generated and then provide more specific feedback and instructions. So coming over here to our register page, we've got our nice meta there. That makes total sense that we would have register React Router app. Here's the description. Awesome. And then we have our register route. We've got a use state for the form data. This is not how we're going to do this. So I'm going to review it all and then we'll go through and we'll fix this. We've got our errors right here. We have a handle change, a validate form, handle submit, and then our UI. That looks perfectly nice. So the first thing that I want to do, I don't really see anything really concerning here, but the first thing that I want to do is change the way that we are managing the state. So we do need to know what the user is typing as they're typing it, because that is one of the requirements that validation should happen as the user types. So on change, we should probably think about the user experience though. We don't want to yell at the user while they're in the middle of typing if they haven't touched that field before. And so we're going to want to make sure to only trigger validation on blur of the particular inputs. And so that's just something that we're going to have to think about as well.
So two things I want to point out here. One is, as he was reviewing the code, he was keeping mental note of what he wants to change instead of changing it right there and then. Why this is helpful is because it helps you kind of look ahead to see what else is going on in the code to better understand the overall structure of the code. Second, he's also thinking about the user experience. He pointed out the same thing about blur. I think all three of them pointed out the thing about blur, which is something that you got to keep in mind while you're doing the interview, is question the requirements and give your opinion as an engineer as well. The best front-end engineers are people who think about both the code and the user experience.
And then, submit the feedback button should be disabled until all the fields are valid, and providing some visual feedback, etc. So let's think about this here. We've got our form data. This actually is pretty reasonable to use state for this. Originally, I was thinking, oh, well, let's just do the error checking when they submit. Then we don't have to manage anything in state. But then I remembered we do have this requirement that we have to show the errors as the user is typing. So that means we do have to keep track of the value.
So that is a great way to show how not jumping into code without taking a look at the entire code structure can be really helpful in avoiding premature optimizations. Now, one thing that Kent does really well is he comes back and corrects himself and says, well, that wouldn't have been the right decision to do. So let's continue going down the path. And that is a great way to showcase that you exhibit accountability and you can correct your mistakes as you're writing the code.
And so, yeah, we've got our form data right there. Actually makes perfect sense. The handle change, I actually really like this. So what it's doing here is it's able to pass the same handle change or the same change handler to each one of these inputs. And then it uses the name on that target and the value. And then here we set the form data previous value. We just update the form data for each one of those. And then clear the error when the user starts typing. If there's an error in that name, we're going to clear that. Okay, yep, that's pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that idea. And we should probably, here, let's check when it validates the form. So it validates on submit. We need it to validate as the user is typing. So here's what we're going to do. We need to validate as the user is typing and display errors, but only after they have blurred the input at least once. Okay, so with that, and also I forgot we need to change the structure of the form a little bit to have a first name and last name. So we'll do that. We were not asked to have a confirmed password, but I'm going to keep the confirmed password in there because users are often going to forget or can often mistype their passwords if they're not using like a password manager or something like that, which many users don't. And so thinking about the user experience, I want to make sure that they type it correctly twice. Of course, I'm not going to prevent pasting because that would be ridiculous. But yeah, we're going to keep that confirmed password for user experience reasons. Okay, so let's review this. We've got touched. That's exactly what I was expecting. We would need to have some mechanism for whether a field has been touched.
This is a great example of keeping users in mind. Now, you may have seen everywhere that in a forgot password flow, you would always have a password field and a confirm password field. And that's what Kent is doing here. He's added a confirm password field, even though it's not part of the requirements. A great way to show that you keep users in the forefront of your code design.
And if the field has been touched, then we're going to go ahead and validate in real time. We are not going to clear the errors. We'll validate it. And if there is still an error and it's been touched, then yeah, we'll go ahead and validate it right away. We need to handle blur. This is going to be the same setup as our handle change. It can be applied to each one of our inputs. We use the input's name to determine which input we're talking about, which input is being touched, and we'll set that value. Now, one thing that I notice here is that this is going to trigger a re-render every single time we blur, even if the touched value doesn't actually change. That's not going to be a problem in this simple form because it's really small, but I'm going to show you how we can avoid that in the event that it was a performance problem, because I am being interviewed here and I want to make sure that you know that I know my stuff. So we'll optimize this to show you how we can optimize this.
Okay, another great thing to show in an interview is that you can optimize your code. But notice that Kent is doing that only after he has made sure that his code is working and his requirements are fulfilled. To prevent premature optimizations, think about optimizations, but do that if time permits you. This is also a great way to show off your skills.
And then we're going to validate the field when it's been blurred. Okay, so validating the field, we're going to take the field name and the value. We're going to have our validation logic right here. If I were to take this, I'm going to leave this the way that it is because it's simple and straightforward. If I were to take this even further and we had more time, then I would use Zod to have a nice declarative validation. It's fabulous. In fact, maybe we will have time. I'm not sure how much time we've got left. So yeah, we're going to I actually kind of like the validation for the email. It literally has some text, an @ sign, some text, and a dot, and some text. That's actually even more strict than it should be. And basically, the only thing that you can really validate is that it has some text, an @ sign, and then some text. That's pretty much it. That is a valid email address. But in practical situations, people are going to have something @ something dot something. And so that's what we're going to do here. The only true way to validate an email is to actually send it an email and have the user give you some validation token or something. So we'll leave that as it is because that's actually pretty good and it's pretty loose. Those regexes can get pretty insane. Okay, so then we've got our password and our confirmed password. We're checking that they're the same. That makes total sense. And then we set the errors by that field name. We set its error value. This again could be suboptimal. If the error message doesn't change at all, we're going to trigger a re-render unnecessarily. We'll fix that here in a little bit when we talk about this. Okay, so then we've got our on blur. We've got showing the error only if it's been touched for each one of these fields. So let's accept this. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and say we need to split the full name into a first name and last name field. And my grammar is incorrect, but the LLM is going to figure that out. That's just fine. And it's going to do it faster than I could. I could be pretty quick at this, but it's going to do it faster, better. It's going to add the validation. It's going to add the field. It will add the state value. All of that stuff will happen faster than I would do it. So we're going to just let the LLM do that for us. And then we can talk about the optimization that we can do here on set touched and the set errors. So let's take a look. We had first name, last name, these are required. And we do have some validation specific rules for each of these fields. So we'll provide those here in just a second. Let's see. So we got validate form. Oh, interesting. So here it looks like we are duplicating logic between validate field and validate form. So we're going to have to fix that. Looks like we're getting, a grid. Oh, interesting. I like that for that. So let's accept this. One other thing that occurs to me here is that this seems ripe for some sort of abstraction. There's a lot of duplication in here, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It's nice and declarative. But I think that in a full application, I'd probably want to abstract this into a field component and have it support, selects and checkboxes and all of that stuff. One of the really nice benefits to that is consistency throughout the UI, more than just making it easier to work with. Consistency matters a lot.
This is a really great call out about abstractions. Sometimes in an interview, you do not have time to abstract the code out and clean it out. However, if you can point out and tell the interviewer that this is something you would get back to if you have more time, this is definitely a plus point for you. Although beware of premature abstractions and optimizations, getting a code to a working point is more important than getting an optimized code.
So let's take a look at what we've got here in our registration form. We've got our first name. Boom. Once we've touched it, then we get validation. So first name, last, and then nothing here until we blur. Email is invalid. There we go. And then type that, and they don't match. Awesome. And then we can create account, and 1Password wants to save it. Okay, so let's, the first thing, or the next thing I want to do is make sure that our validation requirements are met here as well. Here are the validation requirements. The tool that I'm using for speech to text is called Whisperflow, and it's great. I absolutely recommend it. You can work much, much faster using that, and it works in any application. Okay, great. So we've got our first name changes. I think everything else was correct. So let's add that. Let's also say we've got some duplication between validate form and validate fields. Let's remove that duplication.
I love how he's using speech to text to talk to his cursor client, and this makes it so much more proficient. Honestly, having the ability to use AI to write code for me and increase the speed at which I produce software, including videos like this, has been so helpful. One of the big things that I used to struggle with was just getting past brain rot of having to stare at a blank screen and being like, okay, I now have to start writing now to start off with like a basic form again. But having the ability to get it directly from an LLM and have a structured place to start makes it so much easier. I'm building a React crash course where I'm building Netflix, and I am using AI there to help me increase the speed at which I'm producing components. Of course, you have to review your code, but not having to start from scratch helps a lot in just getting going.
Sometimes I want to be like really specific to the LLM and say, this is the way I want you to do this. Other times, I kind of want to see how it's going to do it. And there are a couple different ways that we could go about doing this, and don't really care necessarily which way we do it, unless it does it in a completely weird way, and then I'll be a little bit more specific. So the way that it wants to do this is it's going to keep validate field. It's going to take all the fields and new touched. That's interesting. So, okay, interesting. So we're going to set them all to touched, I think is what it's doing here. I might have done that a little different. Yeah, mark all as touched. Yeah, we're going to do this differently. Then we're going to validate all the fields and boom, awesome. Okay, so we're going to accept that because that's a step in the right direction. Why don't we use the form elements, iterate over all of those to get all of the fields so that we don't have to have duplication. And as we enhance the form with additional fields, we don't have to go ahead and update these. And in fact, you know what occurs to me, since we are tracking this, we are going to have some duplication. And there are libraries that will help you reduce this duplication. I would probably use a library called conform to do this, and it helps you reduce this duplication. It has Zod built in, or Zod support built in. So you basically describe your form with the Zod schema, and then it can help you generate that form. It's really nice, and it's all type safe. It's fantastic. But for an interview, I don't think that we have enough time to get into that. So we would move this over to Zod and conform later. But for now, because we are managing this ourselves, I think we can say we actually know all of the form fields that we care about in our form data. So rather than duplicating those keys in the validation, let's just iterate over the keys that are in form data. And right here, the thing that I'm hoping it's going to do is, yeah, all fields comes from that. And yep, exactly. All fields map to validate each one of those fields. Field, oh yeah, okay, yep, that's fine. That's just, I saw that as, and I'm like, oh, watch out. We got to be careful with as. But I think when you're doing a object.keys, that kind of messes TypeScript up. So we're just helping TypeScript out a little bit here. So coming over here, we're going to go, just go and blur all of these, make sure that error shows up. One thing that I notice is that the form kind of bounces around a little bit. So if we had a little bit more time, I would fix this so that the form has room for the error message, so nothing bounces around, but we're out of time. So then let's also make sure that it can successfully submit the form. So, Cody at kcd.dev, and I love Cody. I love Cody. Cody is my koala mascot for my company. So create account, registration successful. Here's our form data, which if we store as a global, then we can say form data.get first name. That's interesting. Oh, temp1 get first name. There we go.
I do love here how he's able to inspect the form data object itself and check the value that was submitted. This is a really cool way to show your debugging skills and your testing skills.
Data does have all of my stuff. In fact, I can say object.from entries form data dot entries. Object is not defined because I spelt it wrong. Object form data. Oh, right. It's temp1. There we go. Ta-da! Okay, we are logging our form data object. It does have all the field values. And so we can then submit it to a backend and everything is good there. And our validation does still work. Now that's an interesting one. So when if the confirmed password is one thing, so it's I love Cody, and then I change this. Now the passwords don't match. And then if I fix it, I love Cody, then the password is valid, but confirmed password is not validated until I blur it. So if we had a little bit more time, then I would go through and verify that, and I'd also write a test for it. But we're out of time. Thank you so much for considering me for this job. I really like React. I'd love to work at this company. Okay, see ya.
What a great interview. Not only did I learn how to use works with AI, but also learned how to keep the users in mind and not be afraid to add additional fields if they are necessary. Oh my God, that was a blast. 3 devs, same prompt, but different approaches to solving an interview question. All of them had something solid to bring to the table. Piyush Agarwal showed how to keep it clean and grounded, build with only using React and added real-time validation, but he didn't stop there. He thought about accessibility, he thought about other libraries he would use if this was a production environment, and he thought about the user experience of whether it should be an aggressive check or if it should be a gentle check. Jack Herrington, he was confident. He showed off the libraries that he had built, which honestly in an interview shines a lot. And then he questioned the spec. And he said, well, on-change is not very good. And you know what? That is senior engineer energy right there. And then Kent came in with the product mindset, embracing AI like the new gen engineer he is. He talked about building this UI from a product mindset, from a user's perspective, and thought about use case where a password is something that a user needs to type again in order to make sure that they remember it. He talked about his tools, he talked about testing them, he wrote tests as well. He thought about abstractions. He did not just stop at the AI-generated code. He also looked at places where AI could have been wrong, AI mistyped some libraries, and places where AI could be optimized. That is the sign of a great engineer. I hope this video gave you some new perspective on how to approach interviews. Remember, there is no one right way to solve a front-end challenge. Bring your skills and show it off in an interview and own the actual queen and kings that you are. If you like this video, give it a big thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, and tell Kent, Piyush, and Jack a big thank you for coming here. Now, if you want more JavaScript interviews, I have a whole 31-day series of videos for you. Go check that out next.